Adrian is joined in conversation tonight by Mary Robinson. Mary Robinson is professor of art and head of printmaking at the University of South Carolina. She received a BFA in studio art from the University of Colorado, an MA in art history from the University of Wisconsin, an MFA in printmaking from Indiana University. Her work has been exhibited in galleries and museums and art centers throughout the United States, as well as Australia, Denmark, England, Germany, Italy, Malaysia, Hong Kong, and South Korea. Adrian Rhodes grew up and resides in Hartsville, South Carolina. She received her BFA in 2005 and MFA in 2011, both from Winthrop University. She is the recipient of the South Carolina Arts Commission's 2020 Individual Artist Fellowship and the 2019 CCAC Artist Fellowship. Her work has been included in highly competitive group exhibitions at museums and contemporary art institutions in the Southeast, Drawn, Concept, and Craft at the Southeastern Center for Contemporary Art in Winston-Salem, presented her work alongside Leroy Neiman, Kara Walker, Kiki Smith, and Buckminster Fuller. Paper Worlds at the Spartanburg Art Museum exhibited her work with 8 other artists who, according to the curatorial statement, push the boundaries and capabilities of paper. She was also included in the 2019 inaugural Coined in the South at the Mint Museum, Uptown Charlotte, a survey of groundbreaking contemporary art. I welcome you to listen to Adrian Rhodes and Mary Robinson discuss this brilliant body of work.
Can everyone hear me okay? I'm a little worse from allergies. Thank you, Michaela, and thank you to 701 for inviting me to speak with Adrian about her work and her phenomenal exhibition. I met Adrian in 2008, I think. Wow.
Wow.
And I've had the great fortune to work with her at USC in the printmaking program. Over the years, we've had a lot of conversations about art and teaching and family, all kinds of topics. We've had play dates together in the studio.
San Francisco.
Yeah, printmaking conferences. So I'm thrilled to speak with her this evening and so glad that you all are here as well. So we'll have a conversation, and then at the end we'll have a question and answer session. So you can jump in.
And I feel like a lot of people in Columbia are already familiar with me and my work. And so you've heard me lecture. Some of you, a lot, have heard me lecture. I see some former students in the audience. So we're not going to really give that same talk that I've given that you may have heard before. But if any of you are new and would like to talk to me after the conversation, I'm happy to talk to you about anything that you have questions about.
Great. Yeah. So I wonder if you could just start by telling us a little bit about yourself and your journey in art making.
So when I was in my senior year at Winthrop, almost done, coming up to the end of it, I studied under Paul Martica. If any of you have heard of him, it was quite the experience. And we were in painting, and he goes, "Whatever happened to the girl who draws horses?" I was like, "You were the girl who draws horses?" "Oh good, she does turn into a real artist." So I've always drawn. It's always come to me like breathing. It's the way I think about the world. It's the way I process my experience. It's the way I process my emotions. I started out as a 19-year-old who had never had a serious formal art class and never been to a gallery, knowing that I needed to be in fine arts. And I just have worked my ass off ever since to make what I need to make. Listening to Michaela give the introduction was really weird because it's strange to hear somebody else talk about yourself. Imposter syndrome can be really big. As far as I'm concerned, I just go into my little corner and make things that I hope you guys think are interesting. So yeah, I just make things. I feel things and then I make them. So that's it.
The title of your show is How to Untie a Tight Knot. There are a lot of knots in your imagery and physical knots. So I've been thinking a lot about language and how we use the word knot. So, we often use it for security. So tying a child's shoelaces in a knot so that they don't trip. Getting married, we tie the knot. We're securing things. But also, when you have anxiety, you've got a knot in your stomach or a knot in your shoulders. So I would love to hear you talk about some of your associations that you had while you were making the work with knots.
So everything started on this wall back here, which is a series of drawings on found book pages. And I did those right when everything shut down and the pandemic started and we all went home. I was teaching printmaking remotely. I don't recommend trying to teach, of all things, printmaking remotely. And at the same time, I had a 3rd grader and a 3K. So I had college students, elementary students, and preschoolers, and I couldn't go to my studio. And it was like so much. And so then I saw where Penland School of Crafts was posting people doing found poetry out of their catalog. And I was like, oh, I want to do found poetry. And so I found this book, and it turns out it's called The Art Thief, and it's this like pulpy crime noir art heist book that had the best vocabulary in it. And so I started thinking, because my work has always felt very philosophical, but I was not in the mood to do philosophy, so I started doing this poetry. And all of the anxiety and stress that everybody was feeling at that time started coming out in these drawings. And I've always had a lot of ropey mark making in my work. I'm a printmaker, but I started as a painter. And I've always had very gestural ropey marks in my paintings. And so when I did these drawings, they turned into literal knots and tangles and ropes. So it was definitely anxiety, and it was definitely feeling trapped, because I was trapped in my house with my children, who I love, because I'm recording this. But we were all trapped in the house together. And so I started drawing those knots, and the funny thing, as I worked on this set of 4 drawings, was they started out being about the pandemic anxieties and the feeling trapped in the house anxieties that we were all feeling at that moment. But my work's always been very personal, and it's been about a lot of the issues that I deal with, and a lot of my own being stuck in my own head. And so even though I started with the pandemic, it was very quickly, all of my other ghosts were like, oh no, we're here, we've always been here. We're always going to be here. So those ropes, I started thinking about them more. There's so many different ways. They're entangling, they are those knots of anxiety. They're the ties that bind you together. A lot of my work deals with motherhood, and my experience of being a mother, so they become umbilical. I started thinking about trying to be more honest with myself in my work, because that's the hardest thing. I can talk to you guys about it, but it's hard to talk to myself about what I'm really doing. So the more I could be honest with myself, the stronger the work gets. And I realized that I feel trapped in this constant cycle of wanting to cut myself free of the relationships I had in my youth, but tie myself closer to them at the same time. So it's, how do you establish yourself as an independent person outside the way people see you? You know, outside of the way my mother saw me, outside of the way my sisters see me, outside of the way the people have known me since because I've always lived in Hartsville. If you've never been to Hartsville, you should go. It's amazing. Gorgeous little town, but everybody knows me. And not only do they know me, they know my mama, they know my grandmama, they know his mama. This is my husband, he's videoing for me. They know his grandmama. So I love that, but how do you establish yourself independent of who you are when you were in 3rd grade? But at the same time, I've lost so many people in my life, I don't want to lose that either. So it's this constant struggle between tying yourself closer to where you came from and then cutting yourself free of it so that you can establish your own identity. And then I also really like the idea of the Gordian knot. If you're familiar with that, it was Alexander comes to the city, and they have this knot tied to the post, and the oracle has said, whoever can undo this knot will conquer all of Asia. And so he comes to it, and he sees the knot, and Alexander was very proud, and he wanted to conquer all of Asia. So he starts messing with the knot, trying to get it undone, but he can't because it's such a crazy, complex knot. And so finally he says, you know, fuck it, they didn't say how I had to undo it, just I had to undo it, and he cuts it in half. And so it's this whole thinking that in order to cut yourself free of your entanglements, you have to look at it beyond the obvious solution. And that's just a beautiful, I think, way to start thinking about it. I haven't done it, but I've thought about doing it, so, yeah.
How did your knots move from here to here?
Printmaking. So, a lot of you, I'm looking around, and I gotta say, audience, that I think you're the most educated art audience that I've gotten to speak to. Some of you educated by me, so I know what I've told you. Looking at you. Yeah. But it seems like the real hot thing in printmaking right now is digital replication. Everybody wants to use CNC routers, everybody wants to use laser cutters. I'm very old-fashioned, I do everything by hand. But I had to respond to the same question that they are, which is, now that you have digital processes, what is the point of printmaking? So originally it was to create things over and over again and disseminate information to as many people as you could. I feel like printmaking is at the same place that painting was after the development of photography. Now that we can take a photograph, what's the purpose of painting? So everybody had to rethink, why are we doing paintings? And you get all this beautiful stuff that happened in the 20th century. So why are we making prints now? Why am I doing a lithography? Why am I pulling this litho 144 times? And I kept coming back to the idea of the matrix and the way it lets you repeat things. And I am like stuck in my own psychological development. You know, I'm stuck in my own issues. So you have recurring thoughts, you have recurring situations, you have intrusive thoughts. And I have found printmaking to be a way to take the image and then reimpose it in all these different compositions and all of these different manifestations, and then to do more things with those thoughts, and then to develop them, puzzle them out, untie them. So it's really become a way to think about the matrix in printmaking, and what is the purpose of printmaking when we can create digital images so easily. And so that's where that recurrence comes from. I will do the same composition over and over and over and over again, chasing down all these different rabbits in different directions. Yeah.
It's interesting that the word matrix, I love looking up the etymology of words, and so matrix is uterus or womb. And,
oh my God, I didn't know that.
And it's also, yeah, it's also from the word mater or mater.
Mother. It's
yeah.
the mother image. Oh my God, Mary, thank you. Now I have a new rabbit. That's a good one. Yeah. Yeah, so that's what the repetition is. It's recurring thoughts that just keep. Yeah.
So one of the questions that has been posed to you is, does introducing fiber elements into your creations make them a craft object and not an artwork?
Yeah, that's such an interesting question, I think, because I do have a lot of embroidery. And I feel like, isn't it interesting that so many craft practices are the ones that women have traditionally done, and that they're looked at as less important? And so it's just such an interesting little tidbit. Yeah, I have fiber in my work, but it's just a drawn line. It's just another way of drawing. It's just another way of making a mark. And so it's interesting to me that this whole division between craft and fine art, and fiber and fine art, and women's work and fine art gets established.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And paper is fiber.
And paper is fiber, yeah. And I started doing the fiber aspects because we live in such a fast-paced world. You can't even drive through Columbia and stop at an intersection and have the billboard be the same until the light turns green. The billboard's already going to change. When 20 years ago when I was in art school, they told us we had about 3 seconds to capture somebody's attention, but now Instagram is telling me I have to make reels, which is, so I do art about heavy things, and people don't like to think about heavy things, and I think that the way you make the art piece has a lot to do with the meaning that's in the art piece. So there's a set of embroideries on the back wall that took me a year. And I had to sit with heavy thoughts for a year and slowly stitch each bead into place. So that's another reason why I did the embroidery, because I'm rebelling against that CNC router, and I'm rebelling against that laser cutter, and I am intentionally doing something that takes a lot of labor and a lot of time and a lot of patience and a lot of tedium, and it means that I have to sit with these feelings and these thoughts and these emotions for countless hours. So when you see it, you think, God, that took a long time, and it did, but it took probably 3 times longer than you're thinking. But I feel like that pulls so much into what the work means. It's not just, the texture of it is fabulous, but, it's literally suturing things. It's literally tying things up. It's literally embellishing truths and embellishing thoughts. And so how interesting is it that that can be looked at as, is that just a craft? Is that just making it pretty? Would it be a bad thing if it was?
And I think the lines between craft and fine art, quote, fine art, have really blurred so much. I think this probably would have been more of an issue or a question maybe in the 1960s and 70s. You brought up, being in a fast-paced world. How do you, when you're working and you're planning your work, how do you draw someone in and then hold their attention? Or what is it that you think about your work draws them in, but then and holds them there?
That's interesting too, because a lot of people, and when I was in my grad school, I had grad seminar that for the entire semester we talked about the invisible dragon and the idea of beauty in art in the Maplethorpe portfolio. The entire semester. One of the best seminar experiences of my life. That was a lot of teeth in that. So this idea of beauty being something that's not valued in fine art seems very pervasive in our world. And it's a way to dismiss things. But I have found that it is a way to make difficult topics accessible to the casual viewer, to the person who hasn't devoted a lifetime of study to the arts. And so they come in and they see beauty in the work, and it's like it invites them in, and they come in and they're like, wow. And then once they get in, then they start to realize, oh, those are bruises, and they're old ones, and here's some scars, and here's some scabs, and this is like, I've done paintings that are literally bleeding out across the floor, and are very violent paintings, and I have people be like overcome by the beauty of the paint and the combinations of the passages. So it's a way to be like the flame, and so then the people get drawn in, and then they get stuck. They come in to look at these little close details, like, what is she doing? And they go, oh, shit. That's what she's doing. So, that's kind of, I've started trying to intentionally make it inviting, and then once they're in, then I can start talking to them. Yeah. If I didn't have that kind of siren song in this exhibition, I wonder how many people would be in the room for any length of time at all. Like if it didn't have that beauty aspect to it, would they just like walk, circle out and leave? Would it be too overwhelming? So I kind of try to intentionally use rhinestones, and I'll use iridescent paint, and I'll use gold beads, and I'll make things shiny, and I'll do lots of textures, and I'll do lots of patterns.
Okay, since you brought up shiny. Texture, patterns, and we've been talking a little bit about installation. I know that you love going to Disney World.
I do.
And I'm curious if, because you and your family go,
As much as we can.
yeah,
Yeah.
at least twice a year.
It depends on the year. So like we only went once this year. God, doesn't that sound like a first world problem? I only went to Disney World once this year.
But that's I haven't been since I was a child, but that's a total
Immersion.
sensory
Yeah.
immersion.
Well, the thing I like about it is they have this big sign. If you've never been, they have this big sign that says, "Welcome to Walt Disney World." And then you drive under that sign and you're in a total bubble. The real world doesn't exist. You're in this absolute fantasy that is highly crafted, and I'm always there with my husband and my children, and I have found that the years I go the most are the years that I'm the most depressed. And I have told people that I had a choice. I could go to therapy or I could go to Disney World, and I decided to go to Disney World. So the year after my dad died, I bought annual passes. And he would come home from work and I'd be like, "I booked us another trip down to Disney." And he's like, "You had a rough day?" I'm like, "I had a very rough day." I think we went like 5 times that year. But it is just such an immersive experience. And I really believe in craftsmanship and artwork. And I think that's a result of studying with Martica. Craftsmanship was almost literally beat into me. And I was definitely raised with the idea that you give the work what it needs. It doesn't matter what that is. It doesn't matter how long it takes. It doesn't matter how hard it is. You'd better get started. Eventually you'll finish, okay? If you have to fold 800 paper bees, fold 800 paper bees. If this embroidery is going to take you 18 months from now, you're going to wish you started sooner, okay? Chop, chop, go to the studio. So that attention to craftsmanship and that level of detail is something that I think I really resonate with when we go to that escapism. But people tell me that I can't go to Fantasyland, and it turns out it's in between Tomorrowland and Adventureland, and I totally can. So I do.
To nature and female imagery make your art less relevant to the other half of society?
Oh, that's a fun one, isn't it? I feel like can you guys guess what I'm going to say about that one? Based on my previous answers to some of the questions so far. Why do we assume that the standard is white and male? Okay? So there are definitely things within this work that are more universal. I deal with mortality. Everybody dies. I deal with loss. All of us experience that. I deal with motherhood, but all of us have had a mother of some kind. Whatever relationship we've had, be it good, bad, ugly, or a strange mix of all of the above. So yeah, my experience as a mother definitely is a part of who I am. And my work's autobiographical. I finally admitted that to myself. I was not okay admitting that for a long time, but I finally admitted that to myself. But it would be dishonest of me to make work about somebody else's experience. So how is it exclusive of half of society any more than what we normally consider to be the standard, which is usually a Eurocentric white male standard traditionally? That excludes more than half. So there's aspects of my work that do pertain to femininity and motherhood and the maternal. But then there's a lot of aspects of it that are, broach on a broader aspect of it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. You kind of figured that out from my answer about the embroidery, though. So.
I'm curious can you talk more about your association with pomegranates?
Okay, that's a good one. Pomegranates are one of the most loaded iconographic subjects that I've come across. They are fascinating. As fascinating as they are delicious, if you like pomegranates as much as I do. So some scholars, and don't ask me to cite them right now because all my research is I haven't read it in a while because I didn't do anything for the month after the show went up. I was tired. Look around, you can see how tired I was. But there's some scholars who think that the fruit of the Garden of Eden was not an apple, it was a pomegranate, which I think is really interesting. And then you're going to understand so much more about my work if you have a grasp of Greek mythology. Pomegranates associated with Persephone go back to that myth, Persephone and Demeter. It's a mother myth. It's also a death myth. So it's love and it's loss and it's mortality all tied up together. You cut into a pomegranate and it just bleeds out everywhere. So it's a very violent fruit. And a lot of my work, if you look at it long enough, it gets pretty violent. It looks like a physical violence, even though it's more of an emotional trauma response. Excuse me. But so that pomegranate bleeds out all over the place. Then, this is not like directly related to it, but I love this about pomegranates. They were the personal emblem of Catherine of Aragon. And so when Henry divorced her and married Anne and Henry made the stonemasons go to all of the castles and chisel off the pomegranates that had been carved into the mantelpiece because it was one of her personal symbols. So I just think that's interesting. Then there is a saying, a blessing. So pomegranates, they have all these like death associations and mortality associations. But then there's a Jewish blessing, I believe, that is, may your blessings be as numerous as the seeds of a pomegranate. And pomegranates are embroidered on cloths, tablecloths, and they're looked at as this bountiful. So it's so bountiful. And so it holds life and death simultaneously within itself. And that's why I like pomegranates.
The word fecund keeps coming up. And it goes back to matrix
and complication. So much of my stuff is about complication. It's like, how can you feel such different feelings about the same damn thing? Mm-hmm. Positive and negative at the same time. Things that should exclude each other. Things that are such opposites. They're not even two sides of the same coin. They're so diametrically opposed to each other, they shouldn't be able to exist in the same space. But you can hold this love and this fury at the same time for the same person, almost as if they're completely different people. And so this pomegranate holds bounty and tragedy at the same time. It holds temptation and expulsion, and it holds knowledge, and it holds, mothers and daughters, and it goes back to the idea of, do I cut myself free of where I came from, or do I tie myself closer so that I don't lose lose it? You can't hold it and let it go at the same time, but that's all you want to do. I'm being really open with y'all. I should have had wine, not water.
I've been thinking a lot about, there's a long tradition at this point of working large scale in printmaking and pushing printmaking into a three-dimensional realm onto three-dimensional objects, and also in an installation format. And yet still it's so surprising and fresh when you see a wall of the same print, same print over and over again. And why do you think that is? What makes that still fresh?
It's that Disney World experience again. It's that creating an environment. It's that all-encompassing, overwhelming. And I think we're all drawn to regularity. We're all drawn to predictability. We want to control things, and we tell ourselves, if I can control all the aspects of this situation, then I can predict the outcomes, and if I can predict the outcomes, I can make sure they're outcomes that are favorable to me. It's a lie, but you feel that way. And so that beat, that regularity, it's reassuring, and it builds that structure. And, I build that structure and then I break it down again. Mm-hmm. So.
Yeah, and there's also something, just the hand-pulled print, knowing that it's almost exactly the same, or can be, but it's not exactly the same.
How close can you get?
Yeah, there is variety within that repetition.
And it's the time again. You see the time.
Yeah.
You see the time that goes into it. But it's funny because I remember saying in a talk I did once about how it actually speeds things up, because if I had drawn each of these, it would have taken 40 or 100 times longer than I actually did. So I can put 100 hours into carving a block, but then it takes me 10 or 15 minutes to pull the print. So each time I pull the print, it multiplies that evidence of time, and it multiplies that evidence of the hand until you can have this overwhelming. As you walk around the exhibition, or any of my pieces, one thing I hope people do is I hope that they pick up on this repetition between pieces and this recurrence between the pieces, because a lot of times I think of the individual pieces as components of the larger. So, you know, each of these is a finished drawing by itself, and they are for sale if you want them. But installed like this, they become something a little bit bigger than that. And then you see the observatory here, and then you see it repeat there, and then you see it repeat there. And
See
then
this one really repeat.
you see that really repeated over there, and then you realize that like this litho is that drawing, and this drawing of the hands is the same as the litho over there. And so they reinforce each other, and they build on each other until in the end, the individual pieces in the exhibition are as much components of a larger piece that you'll only see now. You know, September 1st, it goes away forever. But they function the same way that the individual marks in this particular drawing function. So it's this building. It also goes back to ideas of inheritance, which goes back to the natural line, which goes back to, you know, I have a hard time moving on from stuff. Just get stuck.
It's also just interesting to see the same element in different contexts. It's kind of like people. We're here and then we're there.
And, you know, okay, so it's a drawing. What does it look like as a woodcut? And now what does it look like as a litho? And now what does it look like as an etching? And this etching should make a great painting. And what if I take this one piece of a painting and put this with this other woodcut? And then, it's just endless. The more I make, the more I need to make, which is both exciting and sucks real bad. I was framing this show, and my husband stepped into the gallery to check, into my workspace to check on me. And I just looked at him and I said, I'm tired and I would like to stop now. But I couldn't. And I had to see it through to the end because, it goes back to Paul Martica. You have to give the work what it needs, and it doesn't matter what that asks of you because the work deserves it. And work is always with capital W. Mm-hmm. The work deserves it. I guess, in the end, the work is the altar I worship at. It's, you make the things. You record the experience, and then is it a prayer? Is it a plea? Is it something both in between? Contradictions? So there's just the work at the end of the day. That's all that matters.
I'm anxious to hear questions.
I did it right, she's anxious, huh?
But is there anything that we didn't talk about that you would like to address in the show or your...
I really appreciate everybody coming out. And I'm really excited to hear the questions that you have, and I appreciate you coming and talking with me today. This has been a marathon, not a sprint. You see the work, all this work has been made since 2020. Some of you know my history with the 701 prize. I have applied every year since the first prize, and I have come in fourth so many times that it became a long-running joke among certain people. And so I feel like I have been waiting for tonight for 12 years, so ask me some good questions. Okay?
And I open it up to you all. What questions do you have for Adrian?
Well, talk about that journey. Talk about what it means to be emerging artist, and every inch that you move, every step that you take, closer to a goal that you set for yourself.
Well, it has been, would you say a bloody struggle, psychologically bloody struggle? He's like, yeah, it has. I think it goes back to the idea that the work is the only thing that matters. And so, yeah, I would feel discouraged when I didn't get to where I wanted to be with the work. But it wasn't ready yet. I think about the work that I was making the first time the call went out, and the second time the call went out, and the third time the call went out, and the fourth time the call went out. And it wasn't ready. But what I would always try to do is look back on when I got the no. I always took it as a not yet. And the answer is always in the studio. And so anytime that I have been confronted with disappointment or with loss or with grief, the answer's in the studio. And so I think it's just the way I'm made, that I just go back and I try again. Now, I will say to all the young artists or old artists or in between artists, the other artists who are in here, to please remember that when you put your work into a competition, you are not really applying for the thing you think you're applying for. All that you're trying to do is get your work in front of whoever's looking at it, okay? Whoever that jury is. I came in fourth. I'm not supposed to know how many times I came in fourth, but the jurors each time would be like, come to me later and be like, hey, I was on the jury for the 701 prize, and we got it down to 4, and you could only take 3, we had to cut somebody, and we cut you. But your work was really strong, and here's another opportunity that I think you would be perfect for. And I have sold paintings, and I have been included in exhibitions, and I have been written about, and I have been remembered because I failed at the thing that I was trying to do. So if you're failing, fail harder. Fail upwards until eventually you might land where you want to be. I just think, I'm really glad I don't have to apply this year. And I'm also, it's like the first time ever, I'm just like, the call went out and I don't have to do it. I can't do it. I'm ineligible. Yes?
What did having the residency and the space here versus your own studio contribute to the project?
Focus, for one thing. So what I did, I won this and I scheduled when this was going to be. And it was 6 weeks. And so I said, hey, Michaela, can I do 5 weeks in residency and then a week for the install? And she's like, sure, Adrian, whatever you need for your work. I said, thank you. And so then I applied for a winter residency at Pinland. And I said, listen, honey, I know that you're going to have to do all the childcare while I'm gone. They're 10 and they're 6. I said, but I'm going to go to Pinland for 2 weeks, and I'm going to pull all the lithography that I can. And I'm going to take all those prints with me to 701, and then I'm going to turn those prints into something else. And he's like, yes, do it. Thank you. So that's what I did. I probably got, 2 years worth of work done. Comparing, this show would have happened in some space eventually. This work would have happened in some space eventually. As long as I'd gotten to go to Pinland and make those lithos, because I had to have them in order to make the other pieces in here. But it was just like an incubator. I didn't have to take Sophie to swim practice. I didn't have to take Pete to ukulele. I didn't have to come home so he could go to work. So I could just make things around the clock. Also, I am a total homebody. So when I was up here, I was like kind of hella homesick, which turns out to be really great for my work, because then I can just put on really sad, moody music and just get lost in it and be like, I'm making the art that I need to make. It hurts so good. So that was another aspect of it. But as a mother, I want to show my daughters, because I do have daughters, that someday, if they choose to grow up and be mothers too, they don't have to stop being themselves. And so I come to do this thing in a large part to show them, because after I had my first daughter, I was 5 months pregnant when I defended my MFA thesis. I don't recommend that. But my cohort gave me a baby shower, and one guy in there goes up to me and goes, I know nothing about babies, but you use a lot of matte medium. So I got you a jar of matte medium. And it was wrapped in green cellophane. And then my daughter was born, and she is the light of my heart. But it was a very near thing for a year. I felt like I was going to lose Adrian because mother had come along, and Everything in your life tells you that a good mother sacrifices who she is for the benefit of her children. And so he had no idea at the time of that little baby shower. But I held on to that bottle of Matte Medium like a totem. It was a lodestone to help me find my way back to myself. And so I told myself, once I found myself again, that the best thing I could do for them was to show them by example that they didn't have to stop being who they were when they became a mother, if they became a mother. So getting to leave them, I tell them, I have to leave you so I can make art about how much I miss you. And they're like, that is messed up. I'm like, no, but that's the way it is. Goodbye. Yeah, you're nodding. I know you have a daughter too. So you have two. Yeah, so it's not recommended, is it? No, not at the same time. There's easier ways to get through your thesis dissertation than to be pregnant, but you know, there are harder ways. There are harder ways too. You know, the men on my committee were kind of like handling me with kid gloves, so that was nice, but the exhaustion element of it was pretty rough. Yes.
The pieces behind us, the three-dimensional pieces, how did you come to compose the entanglements of them, and the knots and
The idea of it or the construction?
well, not the physical construction, but how did you decide to compose it in that particular way for each of them versus some other way, or was it as you were installing it, or had you already decided beforehand? Or
So the hanging pieces I made while I was in the loft, and the loft is just around the corner. If you've never seen it, it's got the same gloriously high ceilings. I knew that I had been doing the drawings of the knots, and so my work for a very long time has walked this line between two-dimensional and three-dimensional. And I'd done the fully immersive installations, but I had not yet done a true in-the-round sculpture that was that's what it was. That's all it was. It wasn't coming off of a painting. It wasn't, a protrusion off of a print. So it felt like what the work needed. And it's that Gordian idea again. You need to look at it from an unexpected angle to find out where it needs to go and what it needs to be. So if I'm doing the drawings of the knots here, I just need to draw the knot in space. And so for these two, I rigged them up in the rafters, and as I would sew the segments, I would just knot them. And I don't really know how to explain it other than I was drawing in space. So it was to me, making it felt very similar to the same way I draw. It's just that I was doing it physically instead of doing it with my mark making device on the surface. Then, after I got these two done, I came back for that 1 week, and the first 3 days of that week, I just made as much yardage of noodle space as I could. And I was like, hey, Michaela, look, I have more. And she's like, okay, Adrian. More, yay. And so that's when I did the ones that are on the pedestal, because I was like, sculpture. It's new and it's fun. It's drawing in space. It's just drawing. Everything I do is drawing. And sometimes I feel out of place with the printmakers, because all the printmakers have better pedigrees, and all the printmakers are more technically skilled. And, they've been to Tamarind, and they've been to these really great, their print skills are. So I'm like, I'm a solid printmaker, but your printmaking is so much more technical than mine. And I feel out of place with the painters. Some of my best friends are some people that paint, like, it blows my mind that you can do that with paint. I'm like, I feel out of place with painters. And then I kind of feel out of place with sculptors sometimes. So it's like, I do all of these things. But in the end, when I sit back and I ask myself, what do you do? The answer is I draw. It doesn't matter if I'm drawing in a print. It doesn't matter if I'm drawing in a sculpture. It doesn't matter if I'm drawing with a painting. Everything I do is drawing. And so then when I think about myself as a drawer, I never feel out of place with the drawers. So I'm multidisciplinary. It's rooted in printmaking. My degree is in painting, but I just draw. It's all drawing. It's drawing the whole way down.
I'm kind of interested in your play on color or the lack of color. Do you play on other colors too like this, or?
So it's amusing because once upon a time I was told that my color was overtly high intensity. And I feel like it has just leached out of the work as I've gone through shit. It's just faded away. And so, you know, it sounds so sad, but I still have beauty. You know, I still have texture, I still have these other things. But the high, bright colors have just gone away. And I don't know when or if they'll come back. I used to use these you remember, Mary, when you first met me, my palette was like neon bright. The blues and the greens and the violets and the pinks. It was like Barbie Dreamhouse pink. It was bright AF. And then it just, as I've dealt with things, it just hasn't been right anymore. And it's just gone away. So I don't know when or if it will come back. When something needs to come in, it lets me know. I started a new piece earlier this week and I just painted a deer in it. And I'm like, yes, that's the right answer. So maybe the color will come back, I don't know.
There's gold.
There is gold. You take your mistakes and you cover them in gold. And then they're not mistakes anymore.
They're valuable.
They're valuable. Yeah. There's one print on the other side of this wall that I was distracted while I was pulling the prints because I did 11 lithographs in 10 days. So if you're a printmaker, think about that for a second. Grained the stones myself and everything, 11 lithos in 10 days. And at one point I didn't go all the way through the press because I was exhausted and not paying attention. But paper is expensive, so I tried to fix it, and then I realized I had this really disjointed print, and so I just painted it gold. And I'm like, yes. Now it's a monoprint.
Anybody else? Any other questions?
Just curious, there's obviously repetition of certain images, the heart, the knots. Are there any symbols that you discarded along, these are at the end of 12 years or whatever, are there any things you started to work with and decided they weren't the work, so to speak?
That's a really interesting question. I'm trying to think. Mary, can you think of anything that you've seen, other than color, go away? I've changed the way I've used things. So like I used the skull is still
Not
here.
as much, I know, but not as
much.
Yeah.
Huh?
The bees are less.
The bees are, but they've changed. The way I've used the bees has changed because it used to be hives of bees, and it used to be all the worker bees. And it has become reduced to just one bee, or maybe just two bees mirroring each other. And, or make the ghost of a bee that should be there and it isn't. Because a lot of my work, I'm thinking about things that should be there that aren't. You know, there's a lot of people that should be in the room that aren't in the room. So there's a lot of that. So the way I've used icons have evolved. But I don't know, I don't know what I've truly discarded. I've become more selective in the way I've used them. And I think in the past year, I've added a few new ones. So the pomegranates are still there, the bees are still there, but they're different. The bees are different. I added the stork scissors, which are fascinating iconography, the stork scissors. Does anybody want to ask me what the story of the stork scissors are? Oh, yes. Adrian, what is the story of the stork scissors? Okay, so embroidery scissors look like storks, right? Does anybody know why?
Umbilical cord.
Yeah, because they started in midwifery. And they were used to cut, and they were used to clamp, and they were used to suture. And so what would midwives do while they were waiting for labor to progress? They'd work on their embroidery. And then the scissors made the move from one side of the bag to the other. And so it's that idea of cutting part. And so cutting is also constructive though. So you cut away things that no longer serve you. And it might be painful. But like if I cut my hair, it doesn't hurt. If I cut my fingernails, it doesn't hurt. You have to keep cutting away the things that no longer serve you until it starts to hurt. And then when you know those vital things are all that's left. So the cutting is constructive even in its destruction. So that's why I like the scissors. So those are a new symbol for me, and I'm kind of hung up on them. And maybe
Go back to the death and birth.
it always goes back to the same things. I'm stuck, stuck.
Aren't we all though?
Aren't we all? Yeah. Anybody else?
Adrian, talk a little about, if you would please,
Yeah, happily do. I like to talk.
about the residency and what it means for you, particularly because the prize call is open.
It's open, so if you're not 40, apply for it. It's affirmation, and I don't think I've ever felt so supported in my work as I was in doing this residency. I have won prizes before, like a best in show or something like that. It's great, and everybody claps, and they give you a nice check, and that check is good for a lot of things. But the residency gave me time, and there is nothing more valuable than time, especially when external factors rightfully demand your energy and your space. So there's nothing more valuable than time. And like I said a few questions back, I think I got, 18 months worth of work out of those 6 weeks. The painting on the back side of the wall here, the diptych there, it took me a year to paint it? Going into my studio and working for 2 hours, 3 hours at a time, it took me a year to paint it. In the course of the residency, I did 2 paintings. And a whole bunch of other stuff.
Because it's not just time, it's focus.
It's focus.
It's focus.
But it reminded me that the root word of painting is pain. Yes, it is, Susan. Painting is hard. So yeah, I got 2 full large-scale paintings. I got 2 full large-scale embroideries. I got the full set of bruise drawings. I got all of the pieces on gold. I got everything that's on like the tan colored canvas. I think I did like 23 or 24 pieces.
I think you also got visitors who gave you, who told you what they saw in your work. So you got
and that was
feedback.
nice.
Yeah.
A little bit.
Yeah.
It was a pretty solitary experience, but I chose that. It didn't have to be that way. So it let me really just deep dive and get really introspective. And I do say, well, the work would have happened regardless of just happening fast, but that's not entirely true either, because when you're in that deep of a flow, it builds on itself. And you see things, and you see, one of them, all right, so there's 3 litho collages on the back wall. And if you're one of the really printmakers, you'll be like, well, aren't those shin collaged? No, they're not, because they weren't collaged as they were printed, okay? For all the print students I've had, that's for you. But what happened is I had all of my lithos that I brought from Pinland, and then some that I'd done previously in the litho shop at USC. I had them all out on the work table in the loft. And if you haven't been in the loft, the sleeping space is up above, and the art studio is down below. So we're all spread out at the table, and I was up in the loft, and I looked over the railing, and I went, ooh, I'm gluing you. You're a piece right there. I see a piece. It's finished. So I took a picture of it before I started gluing, so I remember where everything went. And then I said, well, I made 1, so now I need to make 3. And so those 3 pieces on the back wall wouldn't exist at all. I might have made, that one would have happened eventually. But the 3 pieces on the back wall wouldn't have happened at all if it hadn't been for the residency. So there were lots of pieces. You need to do it. You need to do it. And if you do it and you don't get in, you still don't know what doors will open for you. And if you do it and you don't get in and you don't get any doors, it still might just be a not yet. It just means the work's not there yet. And you just need to keep going. You keep doing it. Just don't stop. I'm a shark, okay? What happens when a shark stops swimming? Okay? Yeah, the only way a shark can breathe is if it moves. If they stop swimming, they drown. So just keep making the work. Apply for the second one prize. It's amazing. It was a 10-year goal. I skated under the wire because I turned 40 this year. Just made it. Lots of sparkly hairs up here. I'm the oldest young artist you're gonna meet. So do it. It's amazing. It's worth it. Do it. Yeah. Don't take no for an answer. Anything else?
Any other questions?
Just a quick one. So do you work in sequence, or do you work with several pieces at once?
Oh, I work on it all at the same time. Yeah, it's a literal tangled mess, not my studio. I never have just one. The only thing that stands in between me and finishing the piece I'm working on are the 10 other pieces I'm about to start. Right now I have 2 lino cuts, 2 paintings going. And it was the strangest thing about the entire experience was that when I got the show up, everything that I was working on was finished at the same time. I didn't have a whip. No work in progress. That was weird. Yeah. All at once.
Anyone else? I know there's at least one other question out there.
None of my former students have asked me any questions, but Deborah, what did you have?
Hi, my office, I'm a therapist in my office, so interesting because I work with secure attachment. And so I come to my office.
I'm gonna say this.
It's in the art center beside her.
Her therapy office is right literally next door to my studio. And I tell her all the time that if I wasn't in my room, I would be in her room. Yeah.
It's amazing, so I walk out, every time it's like Disneyland, of an explosion of all of this, if you can imagine, in a space like this small, plus 100 times more of that, and she's in there work, and it's just so fascinating, and to see it, like when you said, not yet, not yet, this is the most, I feel like I've lived with these objects that we can tuck away or here, sometimes it's going to spread out, like this, and this is the most beautiful space.
I love this gallery.
And I'm already starting to feel the loss when you said it's done in September. I'm already grieving. And,
Don't.
And I'm feeling the beauty of this and that it gets to be observed. Everything, I've been watching her work for 4 years, and I'm like, oh, and to see this observed, and it's beautiful. So I wanted to ask you about the observatory.
Oh, that's a good one. But also, I'll go up to her and be like, Deborah, look, I drew a bruise. Look, I drew my pain. And she's like, you did. I have a lot of things that I could say about that, but I have to charge your insurance. So the observatory is modeled after one particular picture of one particular, it's the Sphinx Observatory in Switzerland, high up on the Alps. And it's a very arresting image on Wikipedia, which is where I found it when I searched observatory. But an observatory is a place high and secluded, where, that's funny, where a scientist goes to be in isolation and look deeply out into the universe and ask hard questions. And that's the artist's studio. It is a place where I go into seclusion, withdraw, to look deeply and ask questions. So anytime you see an observatory, it's a self-portrait. That's all. That's me in the work, looking deeply and asking questions. And they're the kinds of questions that don't have answers. So if these questions had answers, they wouldn't be good questions. They're the kinds of questions that lead to more questions. It's that philosophical idea of going deeper into the thicket over and over. Yeah.
And I'm so excited because I saw the day that now, your observatory is always standing there, and I saw one where you put
Mirrored it.
observe the observer.
Uh-huh.
The matrix, keep going.
Yeah.
Keep going, Adrian.
I will.
I love all your observing machines.
She sees the mess, let me tell you. She comes in with her client, and I'm in the middle of framing, and I'm like, I'm sorry, Deborah, there's shit everywhere. She's like,
My
keep
clients
it.
look at a piece of hers and they're like, oh my gosh. And they come in and they're talking about important issues from your art.
Yeah.
From your art.
Yeah, it's really interesting dichotomy. So there's also a yoga studio. Yeah, so we have the incense burning like 2 doors down, and it fills the whole floor. You can smell the incense, and you hear the chants, and they ring their bowl, and it's like, and then I'm over there like, my bruises. Yeah, it's great. It's all pain, right? It's pain the whole way down, but in a good way.
Well, I want to thank you all for coming out. It's been such a lovely conversation, and we were thrilled to have Adrian in this space and amazed by the amount of work she created and the deep conversations that were had while she was working. To close us out, I'd like Adrian to answer one more question.
Okay.
I would like you to talk about the body of work. I think we often think about these individual pieces, but Adrian spent a great deal of time connecting all of these pieces, making sure that it was a complete conversation. And that's what a body of work can be. It can be a complete conversation. So I just want you to talk about how meaningful it is to be able to gather this conversation.
Yeah, isn't it interesting that we call it a body? Right? I've been sitting here talking about all of these different aspects for the last hour. And it is a body, you know. It's all interconnected, and it is vital. And I'm not a figurative artist, but I feel like my work is very much of the body. And so, you know, over the past 12 years, as I threw myself at this wall over and over and over again, lots of people watched me, and lots of people encouraged me. And above all, it was Wim would talk to me, and he would be like, first of all, your documentation is shit, fix that. But second of all, your work is getting stronger, but it's still disassociated. It's okay to do a lot of things, but you have to make them make sense with each other. And so that is something that I kept thinking about, and I kept developing, and printmaking, again, is the linchpin of that. Because I have to have something that holds the work together if I'm going to be using this many different mediums. And so the repetition of image is one way I do that across mediums. The repetition of compositional elements, the throw it all up in the air, and then the pieces land, and then throw the same pieces up in the air and let them land again. And then another aspect of it, Michaela, is actually the residency, in that I was able to really deeply focus, and it's having so many pieces in work at one time. If you want your work to be unified, don't work on a piece at a time, right? Find yourself a place that you can work where you can work on 20 starts at the same time. And don't let them all become diptychs, and don't let them all become triptychs. Let them be their own 20 pieces, but work on them at the same time. And so when you have that kind of time, and you have that kind of space, you can work on this one for a little while, and maybe it has the answer to the one on the other wall. And so then they become in conversation with each other throughout the entirety of their creation. And then at that point, they become a body of work. So if you want it to be a body, don't try to grow a foot over here and a hand over here and a head over here. Grow a body. Work on it together and let it come up. I'm really proud of it. It is the most focused that I've ever been. And each piece is like, I feel like they're punching. Like each one's just punching that same thing over and over again, but without being boring. So it doesn't feel like the same piece over and over again. It still feels varied, it still feels fresh, it still feels diverse. But it is all telling the same, different facets of the same thing. So I'm really proud of that part of it. Yeah.
It's like what you heard over there, it's like, it's all separate and staying together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Separate together.
Last call for questions. Well, let's thank Adrian and Mary. Thank you all for coming and supporting programs here at 701 CCA. If you're not a member, please join. If you're not on our mailing list, sign up. And come back. We're doing lots more things. Check the website. Check in. Thank you.
And if you had a question but were just shy, you can talk to me when everybody's not listening. It's fine.